I was sitting alone at a diner booth in Tucson, the kind of place that smells like burned coffee and old grease and somehow still feels like home, when a man I had never seen before slid into the seat across from me without asking. I looked up. He was maybe 38, 40. Broad shoulders. A jaw that hadn't seen a razor in a few days. He had dark eyes that stayed very still when he looked at you, the kind that made you feel like he was reading something written behind your face. "You don't know who I am," he said. It wasn't a question. I set down my mug. "Should I?" He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a photograph. Old. The edges soft and yellowed. He slid it across the table toward me and kept his hand flat on top of it for just a moment before he pulled it back. It was a picture of my son, my boy, 5 years old, standing in front of the oak tree in our backyard in Flagstaff, wearing a red Arizona Cardinals t-shirt 2 sizes too big, grinning at the camera with one front tooth missing. My chest locked up. I hadn't seen that picture in 30 years. I hadn't seen my son in 30 years. "Where did you get that?" My voice came out rougher than I expected. The man looked at me steadily. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look like someone about to run. He looked like someone who had been rehearsing this moment for a very long time. "Because I'm the boy in that picture," he said. "My name is Harold Finch. I'm 64 years old. I spent most of my working life as a structural engineer for a mid-sized construction firm here in Arizona. I coached Little League for 11 years. I taught Sunday school until my faith got too complicated to stand behind a podium. I am not a dramatic man. I don't embellish. I don't exaggerate. What I'm about to tell you happened exactly the way I'm going to tell it, and I need you to understand that before we go any further, because some of it is going to sound like something you'd read in a paperback thriller at an airport, and I promise you it is not. My son's name is Eli James Finch. He was born on a Tuesday morning in March 1985 at Flagstaff Medical Center, 7 pounds 4 ounces, and he came into the world already looking irritated about something, which his mother said meant he was going to be interesting. She was right about that. She was right about most things. His mother's name was Nora. We'd been married 8 years when Eli was born, and we were happy in the quiet, unglamorous way that people who actually work at a marriage end up happy. We had a house on Spruce Avenue with a big backyard and a dog named Biscuit and a vegetable garden that never produced anything but zucchini, which neither of us really liked, but we kept planting it anyway because it felt hopeful. Eli disappeared on a Saturday in June 1994. He was 9 years old. We had driven down to Phoenix for a home improvement expo at the convention center. Nora had her eye on some particular kitchen tile, and Eli had gotten bored the way 9-year-olds do, and I told him he could wait for us near the water fountain just inside the main entrance while Nora and I walked back to look at the countertop samples. We were gone maybe 25 minutes. When we came back, he wasn't there. I want to be careful here, because I could spend 10,000 words describing what those first 4 hours felt like, and it still wouldn't be accurate. It was like the floor of reality dropped out, like gravity stopped being reliable. Convention center security, then Phoenix PD, then the FBI field office, then the news vans outside our house in Flagstaff 2 days later. We searched. God, we searched. Nora quit her job at the dental office and spent the next 3 years doing nothing but searching. Flyers, tip lines, every missing children's organization she could find. She went on a morning talk show in 1996. She drove to California twice because someone called in a tip about a boy who matched Eli's description living near Sacramento. Both times it was nothing. The FBI told us early on that they believed it was a targeted abduction, not a stranger crime of opportunity. Someone knew who we were. Someone had planned it. They had a theory about a man named Dobrescu, a Romanian national with ties to a trafficking network operating across the Southwest, but they could never prove enough to make an arrest. And eventually the case went cold, the way cases do when the leads dry up and the investigators get reassigned, and life keeps moving even when your life doesn't. Nora got sick in 2017. Pancreatic cancer. She fought it for 14 months the way she fought everything, which was with a kind of quiet ferocity that made you feel ashamed of every small thing you'd ever complained about. She died in the hospice on a Thursday morning in November 2018, holding my hand, and one of the last things she said to me was that she believed Eli was still out there somewhere. She said she could feel it. I didn't tell her. I wasn't sure I felt anything anymore. I moved from Flagstaff to Tucson after she passed. There was nothing wrong with Flagstaff. I just couldn't look at that oak tree anymore. So there I was, 63 years old, sitting in a booth at Rosie's Diner on 4th Avenue with a cup of coffee, gone cold, and a photograph of my son at age 5 that I had not seen since the last time I held it in my hands in 1994 before I put it in a shoebox with 100 other photographs and couldn't bring myself to look at them anymore. The man across from me had my son's coloring, dark brown hair going grey at the temples, a particular way of holding his jaw slightly forward when he was thinking, which I recognized the way you recognize a song you haven't heard since childhood. My son used to do that exact thing when he was working out a math problem. I am a structural engineer. I assess load-bearing capacity for a living. I do not jump to conclusions. I do not let wishful thinking substitute for evidence. I picked up the photograph and turned it over. On the back, in Nora's handwriting, Eli, backyard, April 1993. The ink was faded exactly the way ink fades on a 30-year-old photograph. "Where have you been?" I asked. My voice was absolutely steady. "I don't know how." He looked out the window for a moment. The street was busy with morning traffic, people walking dogs, a woman pushing a stroller. Normal Tuesday morning in Tucson. He looked back at me. "This is going to take a while," he said. I waved over the waitress and ordered us both coffee. "I've got time," I said. "I've got nothing but time." His name now was Darian Cole. That's what he went by. He had been living in Albuquerque for the past 6 years, working as a contractor. Ironically enough, construction. Though on the residential side, he had a daughter who was 11 and a wife who taught middle school science. He drove a Ford F-250 and coached his daughter's soccer team. He told me this slowly, watching my face, like he was testing whether the information was landing right. Like he'd imagined this conversation so many times that he needed to verify the real version against the one in his head. He'd been brought to Romania as a child, he said. He had fragments of memory before that. A dog, a yard, a smell he couldn't name, something about a Cardinals jersey. But they were the kind of memories that might be real or might be constructed from things people told him later. He grew up in an orphanage outside Bucharest until he was 7, when he was placed with a Romanian-American couple who brought him to the United States through a private international adoption. Their name was Cole. They were good people, he said. He said it like he meant it, and like it complicated everything simultaneously. He'd had a stable life. He'd never really questioned his origins until his adoptive mother was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 7 years ago and began saying things that didn't add up. Fragments. A name she kept repeating. A city in Arizona. The word taken, which she said in a different register than her other confused speech, like it was something she'd been holding behind her teeth for a long time. After she passed, he found a box in her closet. Inside was a document in Romanian he couldn't read, and a newspaper clipping from the Arizona Republic, dated June 1994. The headline was about a 9-year-old boy who had gone missing from a Phoenix convention center. The boy's name was Eli James Finch. His photograph looked exactly like his school photo from 2nd grade in Albuquerque, which Darian had in a shoebox of his own. He'd hired a private investigator. He'd taken a DNA kit from 23andMe. He'd spent 2 years building a case before he could bring himself to find me. "Why?" I asked. "Why 2 years?" He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. He had large hands, and I noticed a scar along the left thumb, the kind you get from a slip of a utility knife. An occupational scar. "Because I had to be sure before I knocked on your door," he said. "And because I was scared." "Of me?" "Of what it would mean," he said, "if it was true." I am going to be honest with you about what I did next, because I think honesty is the only thing I owe you in this story, and it isn't flattering. I did not hug him. I did not cry. I did not immediately believe him. I sat across from my possible son in a diner booth and I said, "I need to see the DNA results, and then I need us both to take independent tests through a lab I choose, and then I need you to give me a week before we have another conversation." He nodded like he'd expected this. "That's fair," he said. "I'm not saying I don't believe you," I said. "I know, I'm saying I can't afford to believe the wrong thing one more time." He looked at me then with an expression I have thought about every day since. It wasn't hurt. It wasn't impatient. It was something more like recognition. Like he understood exactly what I meant in a way that only someone who had also been waiting a very long time could understand. "Take whatever time you need," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." The DNA results came back in 11 days. I went through a forensic genetics lab in Scottsdale that the FBI's victim's advocate had recommended years ago when I'd inquired about reopening Eli's case. I did not look at them alone. I drove to the lab and I sat in a conference room with a genetics counselor named Dr. Abrams, a small patient woman who had done this kind of work for families for 20 years, and she walked me through the results in plain English. The probability that Darian Cole was my biological son was 99.9998%. I don't remember the drive home. I remember sitting in my truck in the parking lot of Sprouts Farmers Market on Campbell Avenue for a long time, watching a teenager load groceries into a minivan, thinking about absolutely nothing. The brain does that sometimes. It hits a wall too large to process and just goes quiet. I called my daughter. I have a daughter. Renata. She was 2 when Eli was taken. She doesn't remember him. She's 40 now and lives in Tempe with her husband and 2 kids, and she has spent her entire life in the shadow of a brother she can barely picture. She started crying before I finished the sentence. Then I called Darian. "It's confirmed," I said. A silence. Then, "I know. I already got my results. What do you want to do?" I asked. Another silence, longer this time. "I'd like to meet your daughter," he said. "If that's okay, I'd like to see a picture of my mother." I had to set the phone down for a moment. When I picked it back up, I said, "I have a shoebox full of pictures. You can see all of them." We met at Renata's house in Tempe on a Sunday afternoon in early March, 3 weeks after Darian had sat down across from me at Rosie's Diner. He brought his wife, whose name is Louise, and his daughter, whose name is Petra, 11 years old, dark-haired, already with that slightly forward jaw, already looking irritated about something, already interesting. My grandchildren, my son-in-law, Renata. We were all trying very hard not to stare at Darian like he was a ghost, and we were all doing a terrible job of it. He sat at Renata's kitchen table and looked at photographs for 4 hours. He didn't say much for the first hour. He just looked. Nora at 30, holding Eli in the hospital. Eli at Christmas, age 6, with a remote control car. Eli and Renata in the backyard, her in a diaper, him holding her hand with the seriousness of an oldest child who has been told to be careful. At some point, Renata got up and went to the kitchen, and I followed her and found her standing at the sink with her back to me, very still. "He has her laugh," she said. "I heard him laugh at something," Petra said, "and it was Mum's laugh." I didn't have anything to say to that. I just put my hand on her shoulder. Here is the part of the story where things get complicated. Because nothing in real life resolves cleanly, and if you were hoping for a simple reunion story, I want to apologize in advance. About 2 months after we confirmed the DNA, Darian told me something he had not yet told me. He told me in person, at my kitchen table, without his wife, which told me before he started speaking that it was serious. He told me that in the late 1990s, as a teenager living in Albuquerque with the Coles, he had gotten mixed up with some older men in the neighborhood. He said he understood now, looking back, that he had been specifically recruited, that they had known who he was and had found him on purpose, that the network that had taken him as a child had tracked his placement and kept him in their orbit for reasons he hadn't understood at the time. He'd spent 2 years, from age 15 to 17, running packages he hadn't looked inside of and delivering envelopes he hadn't opened. He'd been arrested once, at 16, and the charge had been reduced and expunged when he turned 18. He'd cut ties at 17 after one of the men he worked for was killed in what the news reported as a gang dispute. He said he'd been clean since then. He said he had 17 years of tax returns and a contractor's license, and a mortgage and a daughter on the honor roll to prove it. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because there's more," he said. He pulled out a folder. Inside was a letter, certified mail, arrived 3 weeks prior from a law firm in Phoenix. The letter informed Darian that a civil lawsuit had been filed against him by the estate of one of the men from his past, alleging that he had participated in a scheme that had defrauded that man's business partners of approximately $2 million in the early 2000s. Darian said he didn't do it. He said he hadn't had contact with any of these people since 1999. He said his name had probably been included because he was the easiest person to find. Licensed, contractor, public records, easy to locate. And because dead men make convenient fall guys who implicate the living to reduce liability exposure. I need a lawyer, he said. A good one, and I don't have what that's going to cost. I looked at him across my kitchen table. My son, my found son, sitting in my house, telling me he needed money. I am going to be honest, that is the moment I felt afraid. Not because I thought he was lying to me about who he was. The DNA was the DNA. He was Eli. I had no doubt about that. But I had read enough about fraud cases and long-con schemes to know that confirming someone's identity and confirming their motives are two entirely separate questions. And I had a financial advisor named Scott who had helped Nora and me build a retirement over 40 years that was now sitting in accounts that were comfortable but not extravagant. And I could hear Scott's voice in my head saying, "Harold, slow down." I told Darian I needed a few days. He said, "Dad, I'm not asking you to give me money. I'm asking if you know anyone, if you have any contacts, a referral, anything, that word." Dad, he had not used it before that moment. He had been careful with it the way you're careful with something fragile. I didn't fall apart. But it was close. I called Scott. Then I called my own attorney, a man named Bennett, who has done estate work for our family for 15 years. Then I called a litigator Bennett recommended. A former federal prosecutor named Cassandra Wyatt who practiced in Phoenix and apparently ate civil fraud cases for breakfast. Cassandra agreed to look at Darian's case on a preliminary basis. She called me back 4 days later and said, "Your son's name is on this filing because someone put it there deliberately and lazily. This is a sloppy case and his exposure is manageable, but he needs real representation." She quoted a retainer that was significant but not catastrophic. I paid it. I want to be clear about something. I did not pay it because I felt guilty about 30 years of absence, because the absence wasn't mine. I did not pay it because I was trying to buy a relationship. I paid it because my son needed help and I was in a position to help him, and he had never once in his life been in a position where someone with the ability to help him actually did. Nora would have wanted me to. The lawsuit took 11 months to resolve. Cassandra filed a motion to dismiss based on the evidentiary basis of Darian's inclusion in the complaint, and the plaintiff's attorneys, who were, it turned out, primarily interested in the estate's larger assets, dropped Darian from the suit in exchange for his deposition about the network's operations in the late 1990s. He cooperated fully. He answered every question. During those 11 months, we had Sundays. Every Sunday I could manage. I drove to Albuquerque, or Darian drove to Tucson, or we met somewhere in between for lunch. We watched some football. We talked about construction, about load-bearing walls and foundation grades, and the particular headache of building on desert soil. He came to Tempe for Thanksgiving and sat at Renata's table and carved the turkey because he said he always carved the turkey, and my son-in-law looked slightly put out about it, which Renata said later was the most normal thing that had happened in a decade. Petra, my granddaughter, has started texting me. She sends me animal videos, and I respond with thumbs-up emojis because I don't know how to respond to animal videos otherwise. And she sent me a message last month that said, "Grandpa, you need to learn more reactions," which made me laugh out loud alone in my kitchen in a way I hadn't in a long time. I want to tell you about a conversation Darian and I had in January, sitting in my truck outside a barbecue place in Casa Grande, the engine running because it was cold and neither of us wanted to go back inside yet. He asked me if I blamed him for the things he'd done as a teenager. I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "You should think harder about that," he said. "I'm not looking for an easy answer. I am thinking hard about it," I said. "I've been thinking about it for 11 months. You were 15 years old and you had been stripped of your name and your family and your country. And men who already knew who you were found you and put you to work, and you got out before it killed you. No, I don't blame you." He looked out the windshield. "Louise does," he said quietly. "Not for that, for the lying. I kept things from her for a long time. She knew about my adoption, but I didn't tell her about the other years. Not until I found you and everything started coming out. Is she okay?" "We're in counseling," he said. "It's hard. She feels like she married someone she didn't fully know." "She married someone who didn't fully know himself," I said. He looked at me. "That's not an excuse," I said, "but it's a fact." He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, it is." We sat there a few more minutes with the heat running and the radio off, and then he said, "I wish she could have known your wife." I had to clear my throat before I could answer. "Me too," I said. "She would have liked you. She would have. She would have been so relieved." The word hung there, relieved, and we both understood that it wasn't quite the right word, but it was the closest one. Because some feelings are too specific to have a name. Here is what I know now, at 64 years old, having found my son and nearly lost him again in a different way, and then spent a year watching something very carefully get rebuilt. The people who took Eli from that convention center in Phoenix in 1994 are not all in prison. Some of them may never be. The FBI reopened portions of the case after Darian's deposition, and there is an investigation that I have been told very little about, and that I have made my peace with knowing very little about. Some justice moves slowly, some doesn't move at all. My son is not the boy I lost. He is a man I am still learning. He has habits I don't understand, and opinions I don't share, and a laugh that sounds like his mother's, and a way of going quiet when he's frustrated that I recognize from photographs of myself when I was 40. He is a stranger who is also not a stranger at all. That is the most honest way I can describe it. Renata told me last spring that she thinks Eli's disappearance defined her entire childhood, even though she was only 2. That she grew up in a house, haunted by an absence she couldn't remember, and that having Darian, having her brother, in her life has changed something fundamental in her that she doesn't have words for yet. I told her to take her time finding the words. We've learned that in this family. I think about Nora every day. That is not an exaggeration or a sentiment. It is simply true. I think about the fact that she spent 24 years looking for a boy who was, the whole time, coaching Little League in Albuquerque under a different name, and that she died 14 months before he walked into a diner in Tucson and sat down across from me, and I do not know what to do with that. I don't think you're supposed to do anything with it. I think you're supposed to carry it. What I do know is that the last thing Nora said to me was that she believed Eli was still out there somewhere. She could feel it, she said. She was right. She was right about most things. Last Sunday, Darian and Petra drove down from Albuquerque and we grilled in the backyard. Petra wanted to know if I'd ever had a dog, because she's been campaigning for a dog for 3 years. And when I told her about Biscuit, about the old beagle we had when Eli was small, she looked at Darian with an expression of absolute vindication and said, "See, it's tradition." Darian looked at me over her head with an expression that I had to look away from because it undid me a little, because it was Eli's face. The same slightly forward jaw, the same dark eyes, the same expression that means, what am I supposed to do with this kid mixed with something that is unmistakably, unreservedly love? He's there. He's been there the whole time, just somewhere else, waiting, the same as me. We're still finding each other. I think we'll be doing that for the rest of our lives, and I think that's all right. I think that's more than I ever dared to hope for.